Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered what actually drives someone to just willingly walk into a nightmare? Today we're unpacking a really chilling visual narrative called The Final Frequency. Go ahead and lower the lights, settle in, because we are going to track a traveler's complete descent into Scary Town. We'll be breaking down those exact crucial moments where simple curiosity just violently shifts into inescapable doom. Let's dive in.
We kick things off with what is basically the most primal rule of any dark folklore. It's a stark, simple directive: leave before dark. In the logs of our traveler's journey, this is literally the very first piece of data they come across. It's this oppressive, undeniable warning that immediately sets a hushed, tense mood before we even cross the town borders. You know the kind of message I'm talking about, right? The kind that instantly triggers your fight or flight response. It perfectly lays the groundwork for the absolute dread that's about to follow.
Alright, so the spatial descent actually begins right at the borders of this cursed town. Picture yourself walking up, and you are greeted by this sign. It's splattered with blood, practically screaming at you to turn around. Off in the distance, you can see an abandoned car's taillights reflecting off the wet pavement, and there is this solitary, ghostly figure just blocking the path. Seriously, what would you do here? I mean, for most of us, this is a very clear boundary line, but for our traveler, it was basically an invitation.
So of course, the traveler ignores that first boundary and we enter the town proper. The cobblestone streets are hauntingly quiet. They're bathed in the sickly yellow glow from these really sparse lanterns. Looking at it, you can almost smell the damp earth and feel the biting cold of that fog rolling in. And those trees, the jagged skeletal branches reach out like claws right over the dilapidated houses. But it's a totally deceptive stillness. The town looks empty, sure, but the architecture itself feels intensely predatory. It's almost like it's just holding its breath, waiting for the traveler to venture just a little bit further in.
And this right here perfectly illustrates a rapid, almost whiplash-inducing escalation of peril. On one side, you have the spooky but somewhat passive quiet of the town's exterior. But on the other? That's the grim reality waiting for them later on. It is a visceral, blood-soaked nightmare inside a confined room. The traveler essentially traded the cold dread of the street for the absolute, inescapable terror of a slaughterhouse. Now, what's really interesting about this timeline is how it maps out the exact anatomy of a horror trope. We're tracking the precise chronology of fatal mistakes here. At dusk, they made the initial choice to enter. By midnight, they're actively ignoring physical blood-written warnings. Fast forward to 3 a.m. and the trap snaps shut inside an abandoned hospital. And finally, they enter a state of unknown time. The broadcast room, that's a place where reality completely breaks down. It is just a textbook escalation of really bad decisions.
Look at this solitary traveler here. Completely ignoring common sense, they step right past the rotting wooden fences and directly into the dilapidated, swampy outskirts of the town. Notice how the shadows begin to deepen significantly in this area. The sky is this heavy, oppressive gray, and that muddy, waterlogged ground really reflects the grim reality of the environment. I mean, they are literally sinking deeper into the narrative at this point, moving further and further away from any hope of a rescue.
So as the traveler wanders deeper into the tree line, the environment tries one last time to save them. This sign just emerges from the pitch-black darkness. And it doesn't ask, you guys, it demands, turn back now. Just let that sink in for a second. Think about the psychological weight of finding this deep in an abandoned forest. It's fully capitalized, it's urgent, and it is the absolute final threshold between the world of the living and the nightmare they are about to become a permanent part of.
Okay, so the crucial point is right here. This is the exact terrifying moment the traveler's fate is completely sealed. They encounter the motionless phantom, the woman in white, standing dead center on the wet asphalt under a flickering street lamp. And look right beside her. It's the very sign they just chose to ignore. The juxtaposition is just chilling, right? The warning and the threat are presented at the exact same time. She isn't even chasing them. She is simply waiting for them to make the mistake of stepping forward.
Well, having bypassed the phantom on the road, the traveler is driven indoors. They're seeking shelter, but what they actually find is a cage. We move now into the rotting hospital ward. I want you to imagine the overwhelming smell of rust, dried blood, and just absolute decay. The iron bed frames are stripped and scattered everywhere. And there, staring at the barred window into the storm, is the woman in white again. The lighting here is distinctly cold and blue, which really emphasizes the isolation. She is no longer just a roadblock, she is a warden in a prison.
At this stage, the pacing of our traveler's survival completely breaks down. They flee the ward only to navigate this pitch-black corridor. I mean, the peeling paint on the walls literally looks like rotting skin.
and their meager light source only manages to illuminate the one thing they definitely don't want to see, the ghostly figure now actively blocking the only path forward. The claustrophobia here is just palpable. The darkness is closing in on all sides, forcing the traveler to confront this entity head-on.
Stumbling into this room, you honestly have to wonder, why would anyone keep walking? The actual walls are bleeding a message that clearly says, "I saw you." There is a horrific, screaming face smeared onto the plaster right beside it, and a blood-stained mattress just sitting in the corner. Actually, scratch that. This isn't an implied threat anymore. It is a direct, violent communication from the town itself, specifically targeting the traveler. It's a total psychological breaking point.
In that psychological break, it triggers absolute panic. The environment stops whispering and starts screaming, "Run, run, run." Flashing this frantic text ramps up that extreme cinematic horror, perfectly mimicking the pounding, terrified heartbeat of the trapped traveler. The time for caution, for creeping down hallways, yeah, that's over. The narrative has completely shifted. It is now a pure adrenaline-fueled flight for survival.
That frantic flight plunges them underground into a desperate claustrophobic chase through a subterranean train tunnel. Just notice the smeared bloody handprints dragging along those curved concrete walls. It leaves a literal trail of pure panic. The rails lead directly into absolute suffocating darkness. And standing right there on the tracks, illuminated by the sparse, harsh tunnel lights, is the woman in white. It really emphasizes the metallic smell of blood and that horrifying ultimate realization that there is literally nowhere left to hide.
Okay, let's stop the frantic pacing entirely for a second. We've watched this traveler be herded, chased, and terrified since they first crossed the town limits. But all of this feels coordinated, doesn't it? It feels like a show, which brings us to the ultimate, chilling question that has been building beneath the surface of this entire explainer. If the traveler is the subject, who is the orchestrator? Who is actually broadcasting from Scarytown?
And that brings us right to our terrifying climax. This is the source, the final frequency. Behind the scenes, behind the ghostly woman in white and those bleeding walls, is this, a hooded, skeletal broadcaster with piercing, glowing red eyes. This demonic entity is sitting right in front of an old-school microphone, resting its razor-sharp claws on the town's namesake sign. The traveler wasn't just wandering randomly, no way. They were the star of a dark, twisted broadcast, and their terror was being transmitted by the entity pulling all the strings.
So we've reached the end of the traveler's recorded journey, and the mystery of Scarytown's narrative has been fully laid bare. But honestly, this leaves us with one final, deeply unsettling thought. If this skeletal broadcaster is transmitting the nightmare through this final frequency, who exactly is on the other end? Like, who is listening to the final frequency right now? Well, thank you for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes open out there and, maybe, just maybe, leave before dark.